If you have ever carried a decision in silence, a decision made in fear, one you have never been able to confess to God or to anyone else, you have probably told yourself the same thing I told myself for 13 years. That grace has edges, that some things are simply too far outside the line to be forgiven, that certain silences, once kept long enough, become their own verdict. But that verdict was never his to give. And I know that now because I have been to the other side, and I came back with the answer. What I'm about to tell you is not a dream or imagination. It is something that really happened to me, something that completely dissolved everything I thought I knew about guilt, about grace, and about where the souls of the lost actually go. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I am 34 years old. I teach third grade at an elementary school in a mid-sized city in Ohio. On a Tuesday in October, I was mid-sentence in front of 22 children when my body gave out without warning. The last thing I heard before the floor came up to meet me was the sound of my students pushing back their chairs. I was clinically dead for 11 minutes. And in those 11 minutes, Jesus showed me something I was never supposed to see. At least, that is what I thought. That it was not meant for me. That I was not the kind of person who gets shown where the ones we lose actually go. Turns out, he disagreed. Before I tell you what I saw, you need to understand who I was before I saw it. I grew up in a Baptist household in Ohio. Not cultural Baptist, the kind where you know every verse, every hymn, every teaching about what saves and what condemns. My mother, Diane, made sure of that. She is 60 years old now, still the most faithful woman I know. She woke us up on Sunday mornings with scripture before coffee. She kept a worn Bible on the kitchen table like a centerpiece. She believed that clarity about sin was the most merciful thing a mother could give her children. She believed doctrine was love. I believed it too. I was not performing faith as a child. I genuinely felt it. God was real to me the way the ground was real, something I stood on without thinking. I memorized scripture before I could multiply. I meant every word I prayed. Then I turned 21. I do not want to skip past what came next because the full weight of what I saw in the garden only makes sense if you understand what I was carrying when I arrived there. So let me say this much for now. At 21, I made a decision. A decision I never told my mother. A decision I never told anyone. And from that day forward, something shifted in the center of my faith. Quietly, without announcement. And I spent the next 13 years pretending it had not. Have you ever stopped to think about how much weight silence actually carries? Not the silence of peace, the silence of something you are not saying. That is where I lived for 13 years. I was 21, alone, and terrified. The relationship was already over before I found out. And when I found out, I thought immediately of my mother reading aloud from Leviticus. I thought of the women in our church who whispered about girls who had made that choice. I thought of every sermon I'd ever sat through about the sanctity of life and what defying it meant for your soul. So I made the decision in fear, not in rebellion, not in indifference, in absolute paralyzed fear. I went back to class the following week and I never said a word. What I did not expect was how guilt works over time. It does not stay sharp. It spreads. It settles into the walls of everything, silently, without asking. I became a teacher of young children. Some part of me believed I owed something, that surrounding myself every day with other people's children was the closest I could get to a penance that never quite covered the debt. I was good at my job. I loved my students. That part was real, but underneath the love, there was a crack I could not close. I stopped asking God for forgiveness around year 5. Not because I stopped believing in forgiveness, but because I stopped believing I was eligible for it. I had read the passages my mother cited. I understood what my church taught, and I could not construct a theology in which what I had done was forgivable. I tried. I sat with it. I prayed around the edges of it. And every time I came close, the silence answered me with nothing. I felt disconnected from everything I used to reach for. Here is the loop I was trapped inside. If I confessed, I feared the verdict. If I remained silent, I feared the same verdict, just deferred. Either way, it seemed to end in condemnation. So I lived in the middle, outwardly faithful, inwardly certain that God had already decided about me. I kept a painting on the wall of my classroom, a garden scene, soft, luminous, open. I had been drawn to it at a craft fair years earlier without being able to say why. My students would ask about it sometimes. I never had an answer. Just that it felt important. Just that it felt like something I was trying to remember. That is who I was on the morning everything stopped. Take this truth with you. Whatever you are carrying in silence right now, you're not carrying it alone. I did not know that yet, but I was about to find out. The medical emergency did not begin on that Tuesday in the classroom. It began 18 months earlier at 2 in the morning when I woke up with a pain in my lower abdomen, unlike anything I had felt before. Not cramps, something structural, something wrong at a level I could not locate. I tried to wait it out. By 3 in the morning, I was on the phone with 911. The paramedics told me my blood pressure had dropped significantly in transit. The ER imaging showed what it was: a ruptured ovarian cyst with severe internal bleeding. The surgeon was calm in the way surgeons are calm when they do not want you to see how fast they are moving. I was prepped for emergency surgery within the hour. I remember the ceiling tiles passing overhead as they wheeled me down the corridor. I remember a nurse telling me to count backward from 10. I remember getting to 7. I did not make it to 6. They told me afterward that something went wrong during the procedure. A bleed they had not anticipated. The anesthesiologist called for help. The monitors flatlined. A nurse who was in the room told me later that she had looked at the clock when it happened. 11:47 p.m., I was declared clinically dead. They worked on me for 11 minutes. I know that does not sound like a long time, but what I am about to describe is not in the doctor's report. I did not lose consciousness the way you lose it in sleep. It was not a gradual dimming. It was an instant removal. One moment I was somewhere. Then I was not anywhere. No body, no sensation, no boundary between myself and whatever surrounded me. I want to be precise here. It was not darkness the way a room is dark, because dark assumes there is a space with light missing from it. This was the absence of space itself. No up, no down, no surface to move toward, nothing to orient by. I tried to find my own hands. There was nothing to find. The first thing I felt in the void was not peace. It was terror. Pure and structural. The kind that does not come with thoughts attached. Just the raw fact of existing without a body, without coordinates, without any of the anchors that tell you where you are. And then I felt something else. A shift. Not sound, not light. More like a pressure change in the quality of what surrounded me. A pull, not physical but directional, towards something ahead that I could not yet see. The void began to give way. Then something arrived that was not quite sound, but carried sound's intention. A low resonance, warm and sourceless, something I felt in my chest before I understood it as anything at all. Like a note held just beneath the silence. I do not have adequate words for what came next. I will use the ones I have and ask you to let them be incomplete. The darkness dissolved not into brightness but into warmth, a quality of light with no identifiable source. It came from everywhere and cast no shadow. And with the light came an opening, a presence, a welcome that I had not felt in 13 years of Sundays. And then I understood that I was in a garden. Not a garden the way we mean when we say garden. Open. Vast in a way that had nothing to do with physical distance. The ground beneath me, or what I was moving across, was covered in something luminous and soft. There were no walls, no fences, no shadows. The air, if it was air, felt like something that had never held any suffering inside it. And there were children, or rather presences. They were not infants or toddlers, but small, distinct souls, each one complete and unhurried, moving through the garden the way light moves through water. They were not waiting for anything, not in any transition towards something better, already there, already whole, already held. I moved through the garden, or I was moved, watching them. I could not stop watching. All of my theology was meeting the direct evidence of what I was seeing, and the evidence was not what I had been told. I thought of my classroom, the fluorescent ceiling, the gray winter mornings, the silver cross sitting cold against my chest, something I had stopped touching, something I had stopped believing I deserved to wear. I thought of the loneliness of living among warmth every day, surrounded by it, disconnected from it. isolated from it by a silence I had chosen and could not undo. There was a grayness in that life, a cold distance I had accepted as permanent. And then this place, warm and golden with no edges, no shadow, nothing withheld. Two worlds, and I'd been living in the wrong one. They were not lost, they were not absent. They were not in some divine waiting room of unresolved mercy. They were here, in this place of impossible warmth. And they were whole, in a way I had no category for. Whole, the way only something that has never been broken can be whole. And then I stopped. One of the presences felt different. I cannot explain how I knew. There was no face, no voice, no marker I can point to, but there was a knowing. The kind that arrives from outside of reasoning, from somewhere deeper than thought. And it went into my chest and cracked it open. I knew who this was. It was a profound, undeniable certainty, the way you know your own name. I stood there in that warm, golden, shadowless light, 13 years of silence collapsing all at once, and I understood that the thing I had been most afraid to see was not condemnation. It was this. The thing we most fear seeing is usually the thing that has been waiting, patient, unhurried, complete, for the moment we are finally ready to look. And I was finally ready. He came to me then. I did not see a face. I did not see a body. What I experienced was a presence, absolute in its authority, absolute in its gentleness, and completely absent of the one thing I had spent 13 years projecting onto the idea of God. There was no condemnation in it, not a residue of it, not a withholding of it, simply not there, the way cold is not in fire. He spoke. Though I heard no audible voice, I understood every word with more clarity than I have ever experienced in my life. He said, "She was never yours to lose." Those 6 words. That was the moment. He was not addressing my grief or my denomination's doctrine or my church's long-held position. He was addressing the specific structure of guilt I had built my entire inner life around, the belief that my decision at 21 had removed my child from God's presence, that I had, through an act of fear and failure, placed a soul outside of reach. And he dismantled it in 6 words. Not because the decision did not matter, but because the jurisdiction was never mine. No act of human fear, no choice made in a moment of terror by a 21-year-old girl who was alone and afraid can remove a soul from this garden. The garden does not work that way. It never worked that way. And I had spent 13 years carrying a guilt that was built on a lie. Not the lie that I had made that choice, but the lie that the choice had determined the destination. He told me one more thing, not in spoken words, but in clarity. The way truth sometimes arrives all at once. You followed the fear, but you did not follow me. Now I was standing in the aftermath of it, and nothing in me resisted. You are not the one who determines where a soul goes. You never were. I want to try to describe what happened inside me after those words, not as metaphor, as accurately as I can. The guilt did not fade. It did not soften. It left. The weight I had built my life around, the conviction, the silence, the penance, the daily accumulation of debt I could never repay, simply had no floor anymore. The weight I had normalized as just part of being myself, just the cost of carrying what I had done, lifted in a way I did not know weight could lift. I had been carrying it so long I had stopped calling it a burden. I called it just me, just my quietness, just the reason I could not fully receive joy without measuring whether I deserved it. And then it was gone. He showed me something I did not expect, an image of myself from the outside. A woman standing in front of children every day, arranging art on bulletin boards and tying shoelaces and answering questions about kindness and fairness, carrying inside her a wound that not one of those children had ever seen. A woman who had loved others so precisely because she could not allow herself to be loved the same way. I saw her clearly, and I felt from that presence something that was not pity and not approval, but the specific version of love that has never required you to be other than what you are. Then came, "It is time to go back." It was presented as an invitation rather than a command, a calling to return not to my suffering, but with a new purpose. The guilt was not coming back with me. What was coming back was the answer to the question I had never dared to ask directly. The question 13 years of silence had been built around. I said yes. The antiseptic smell hit first. That sharp chemical smell, Hospital-specific, unmistakable, and then the white ceiling, the fluorescent hum, the pressure of an IV in my left arm, the distant sound of shoes on linoleum in the corridor outside. I understood immediately where I was. The contrast was total, like stepping from July into December in a single breath. My mother was there. Diane was sitting in the chair beside my bed, her Bible open in her lap. She had driven 3 hours when they called her. She looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was simply seeing her differently now. She was reading aloud, softly, in the way she had read to me since childhood. She had chosen a passage she believed would give her daughter comfort in a moment of near death. A passage about accountability before God, about the seriousness of standing before judgment. She chose it out of love. She had no way of knowing what I had just come back from. I lay there and I listened to my mother read condemnation scripture to a woman who had just stood in the Garden of Children and heard Jesus speak. And I felt nothing I expected to feel. No anger, no resistance, no impulse to correct her or argue with the passage she had chosen, just clarity. A clean, quiet knowing that sat in my chest where the guilt used to live. She was reading from the fear she had always known, and I was lying there in possession of something none of them knew yet. I reached up and touched the silver cross at my throat. First time in years, it did not feel like a symbol. It felt like something I was finally allowed to wear. I am still a teacher. The painting is still in my classroom. The garden scene, soft and golden and open, that I chose years ago without knowing why. I understand it now. I told my mother everything. About the decision at 21. About the 13 years of silence. About what I saw on the other side of death. She sat with me for a long time before she spoke. When she finally did, she said, "I wish you had told me." And I believe her. I think she would have suffered with me, and I think that suffering together might have been its own kind of grace. But I also know I was not ready to tell her until I had been shown the answer. Now you know. And if you are carrying what I carried, a decision made in fear, a silence you have held for years, a guilt you have stopped asking to be released from because you already assumed the verdict, I am not here to debate doctrine with you. I am here to tell you what I saw with my own eyes. In the 11 minutes I was on the other side of death, the garden is real. The children are there. They are not waiting. They are not in absence. They are whole and warm and held in the presence of the love that made them, a love that does not operate by the rules we constructed out of our fear. You did not place them outside of God's reach. You never had that power. And the guilt you have been carrying in their name is not the truth about where they went. Take this truth with you. You do not have to die to have it. And you are never alone in what you carry. He doesn't abandon you. He always waits for you. If this touched something in you today, if there is a part of you that has been locked for a long time and this story moved something in it, I want you to tell me in the comments what you have been carrying, what hearing this means to you. I read every word. Let's talk about it together. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, stories of what people see when they cross to the other side and come back, do not leave this channel. Subscribe, activate the bell, and watch the next video, because what is coming will leave you in shock. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. God bless you.